I'm Azalea. I'm 38. And last summer I drove up to my late father's old mountain cabin, only to find my cousin and his family already living there. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Perfect. Your cabin was just sitting there. We're making it our summer home." That moment changed everything. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. The tires crunched over the gravel as I made the final turn up Hollow Ridge Road. I'd taken that road 1,000 times as a kid, my dad and I driving up for weekends filled with fishing, laughter, and burnt marshmallows. But this time felt different. The trees that once welcomed me now stood tall and watchful, their shadows longer, darker. The cabin came into view, sitting at the edge of the clearing, just where it always had. Yet something felt off. The first thing I noticed wasn't the cabin itself. It was the truck, a faded blue pickup with a dented fender and a missing tailgate. My cousin Mark's truck. My stomach tightened instantly. Mark hadn't been up here in years, not since my dad's funeral 2 summers ago. I parked beside the old oak tree and sat for a moment, letting the engine die out. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. The cabin windows glowed, faintly golden from the setting sun, but the light inside looked too bright, too alive. My heart began to pound, not from excitement, but from something colder. As I stepped out, the scent of pine and distant wood smoke filled the air, stirring old memories. I smiled faintly despite myself. Dad always said this cabin was where the world slowed down enough for the heart to catch up. But when I reached the porch, my smile faded. There was a fresh doormat, bright red, reading "Home Sweet Home." Ours had always been plain brown. There was also a hanging basket of flowers, neat and colorful, and a new welcome sign nailed into the post. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Mark stood there, wearing one of those lazy grins that always meant trouble. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he owned the place. "Mark," I said slowly, "what are you doing here?" He shrugged. "Oh, just enjoying the summer. Figured since the cabin was sitting empty, it might as well get some use." I blinked. "Use? This cabin, this was Dad's place." He laughed, a low, dismissive sound. "Yeah, was. But nobody's using it now. You didn't seem too interested." My jaw tightened. "That's not true. I just needed time." "Right," he said, stepping aside. "Well, come on in, I guess. Make yourself at home." I hesitated before stepping inside. The cabin smelled different, not of cedar and coffee like it used to, but of air freshener and grilled meat. The living room was rearranged. Dad's old leather chair was pushed aside to make space for a bright blue camping recliner. On the mantel, where my father's photo used to sit, there was now a family picture of Mark, his wife, and their 2 kids. I couldn't find my words. My throat tightened as I looked around. My father's things, his fishing rod, his books, his old hat, gone. "Where's Dad's stuff?" I asked quietly. "Oh, we boxed it up," Mark said casually, walking past me toward the kitchen. "Didn't think you'd mind. We needed room for the kids' things." I followed him, my voice rising a little. "You boxed up his things? Without asking me?" He stopped, his back turned. "Azalea, come on. Don't make this dramatic. It's just stuff. The man's gone." The words hit me harder than I expected. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "It's not just stuff," I said softly. "It's what he left behind." He turned, holding a cold drink from the fridge. "Look, the way I see it, this place should be for everyone. Family. You've got your life in the city, right? I'm just making sure the cabin doesn't rot away." There it was, the smirk again. That tone he used when he was twisting something wrong into something that sounded almost reasonable. I took a slow breath. Dad told me this place would be mine someday. You know that. Mark's eyebrows lifted. Did he now? Funny, I don't remember hearing that. Maybe you misheard him. The words were sharp, coated with fake politeness. Mark, I said, forcing calm into my voice. This cabin, he built it for Mom after she passed. It's the only thing of theirs I have left. He sipped his drink, unbothered. Then it's a good thing we're keeping it in the family. Huh? I looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the easy grin was something else, possession, control. Where's your wife? I asked, trying to shift the air. She took the kids down to the lake. He said, we're making it a little summer tradition. Summer tradition. Those words twisted in my stomach, like he'd already decided this was his place now. I walked to the window. The evening sun poured across the lake in a golden shimmer. I remembered Dad teaching me to fish from that dock. How he'd always say, patience, kiddo. Everything worth having takes patience. I swallowed hard. You can't just take over, Mark. He laughed again, shaking his head. I'm not taking anything. You're overreacting. The cabin was just sitting here empty. We're using it. Big deal. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not visibly, but deep. A quiet realization that this wasn't confusion or miscommunication. This was entitlement. I took a deep breath and said, I'll give you tonight, but I'm coming back tomorrow morning and we'll talk properly. He smirked again. Sure, whatever you say, Azalea. Take your time. I walked out before he could say more. Outside, the air was cool, the kind that bites softly at your skin when the sun dips low. I leaned against my car, watching smoke rise from the chimney. My chest felt heavy. For a moment, I thought about storming back in, demanding he leave right then. But Dad had always told me, never fight someone who's already decided they're right. Instead, I sat on the hood of my car and watched the light fade behind the trees. Somewhere in the distance, children's laughter floated through the air, his kids playing where I used to run barefoot through the grass. I stayed until the stars appeared. The cabin's windows glowed warmly in the dark, and it hit me. My own father's home no longer felt like mine. Before leaving, I walked up to the porch again. Quietly, I touched the railing, tracing the carved initials, A+ Dad, 2003. Still there. Still ours. Inside, I heard Mark humming, the clink of plates, the hum of a dishwasher. My father never even had a dishwasher here. I turned away and whispered, this isn't over. As I drove down the road, the headlights caught the edge of a sign nailed to a tree. Welcome to Hollow Ridge, family-friendly vacation area. Family. That word burned in my mind the whole drive home. The road twisted down the mountain, the radio low, and I kept hearing his voice. You probably just got mixed up. Mixed up? No, I wasn't mixed up. I knew what Dad said. I remembered the night clear as day, the way he looked at me after his last chemo session, and said, promise me you'll keep the cabin. Don't let anyone else take it. And now someone had. The tires hummed against the pavement as I whispered to myself, he's not keeping it. Not after this. Somewhere deep inside, grief turned into something else. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, more patient, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my kitchen table, staring at an old photo of Dad and me in front of the cabin. His hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling, proud of the porch we'd built together. And just like that, my resolve hardened. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. I didn't know where or how, but I'd find a way to prove what was mine. Because that cabin wasn't just a building in the woods. It was the last piece of my father's promise, and I wasn't about to let someone else erase it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside my kitchen window was still gray, the kind of quiet light that makes everything look uncertain. I hadn't really slept, just dozed between restless thoughts. My father's letter, the cabin, Mark's smug face, they all kept circling in my mind like ghosts refusing to rest. I made coffee, though I didn't taste it. My hands shook slightly as I packed a few things: Dad's old notebook, a folder for any papers I might find, my phone charger, a small camera. The plan wasn't clear, but I knew one thing: I was going back. The drive up Hollow Ridge felt longer this time. The trees swayed softly in the wind, whispering against each other. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was talking to myself, muttering small reassurances like, "You know what you heard, Azalea, and you're not crazy." When I finally pulled up to the cabin, the truck was still there. Music drifted from the open windows, some country song about family and forever. It made my stomach twist. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Mark opened it with that same grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, cousin. Back already?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." He stepped aside, like he was doing me a favor. "Sure, come in." The living room looked even more like his now. His kids' drawings taped to the fridge, a pair of muddy boots by the door, his wife's floral throw on the couch. My father's cabin was vanishing piece by piece. I sat down on the edge of a chair. "Mark, I want you to tell me the truth. When did you move in here?" He shrugged. "Few weeks ago. It's a great spot for the summer." "Why? You didn't think to call me first?" He smirked. "Didn't think I needed to. Family, remember?" I clenched my hands together. "Dad told me, clearly, that this cabin would be mine someday. You know he did." He let out a slow laugh, shaking his head. "Azalea, you really need to let that go. You were upset when he passed. I get it. You probably heard what you wanted to hear." My breath caught. No, I didn't imagine it. He sat across from me, elbows resting on his knees like he was about to explain something simple to a child. "Listen, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying grief does weird things. You were close to him, maybe you misremembered. Happens all the time." The words hit harder than I expected. "You're saying I'm making it up." He smiled gently, too gently, not on purpose, just remembering it wrong. For a second, the air seemed to thin. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The way he said it, calm, reasonable, made the ground under me feel less solid. I tried to steady myself. "Then how do you explain the boxes? The pictures? Everything gone?" "Oh, that." He leaned back, casual. "We just tidied up a bit. Made it livable. Didn't think you'd mind. You've been so distant." "Distant," I repeated, because I was grieving Mark. "Exactly," he said, like I'd proven his point. "Grief messes with memory." Something about his tone made me want to scream. But I didn't. I just stood up and said, "Where are Dad's things?" "In the shed out back," he said with a wave of his hand. "We didn't throw them away, or anything. Relax." I walked past him, ignoring the way he muttered something under his breath. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped outside, and for a moment I just breathed. The lake shimmered in the distance, still and glassy, like it was watching everything unfold. The shed door creaked as I opened it. Inside, boxes were stacked carelessly, some half-crushed, others damp from the ground. I crouched, pulling one open. Inside were Dad's fishing reels, tangled together with Christmas ornaments, and a cracked photo frame. The picture inside was of me at age 10, holding a fish almost bigger than my arm. My throat tightened. Behind me, I heard footsteps. "See? Told you we didn't throw anything out," Mark said, leaning in the doorway. "These should have been handled carefully." I said. He shrugged. "We've got kids, Azalea. Things get messy. You can't hold on to everything forever." I turned to face him. "That's not your decision to make." He crossed his arms. "You're acting like this is some kind of theft. It's a family cabin. always has been. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. It was Dad's cabin. He built it. He sighed. Maybe Dad said something about you getting it, but there's no paperwork, no will, nothing in writing. Maybe he just meant it symbolically, like you're the one who'd visit sometimes. Doesn't mean ownership. I felt dizzy. You're twisting things. He smiled, that same gentle, infuriating smile. You're just remembering it wrong, sweetheart. The word sweetheart made my blood run cold. That false softness, like he was patting me on the head for being emotional. I'm not crazy, I said quietly. Didn't say you were, he replied smoothly. But you might want to take a break. You've been through a lot. Maybe talk to someone. Clear your head before jumping to conclusions. It was so calm, so calculated that it almost worked. For a moment, I felt small, unsure. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did remember it differently. Maybe grief had blurred things. But then I looked at the box again, the photo, the smell of sawdust, the faint pencil marks my dad used to write on the wood beams when measuring. Everything about this place screamed his presence. There was no mistake. I stood tall. You're not staying here permanently. He tilted his head. We'll see. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. The day dragged on. I sat by the lake, watching the water ripple with each passing breeze. I could see the reflection of the cabin in the water, bright, cheerful, and wrong. Mark's wife, Kathy, came out later with a tray of lemonade. You're still here? She asked, polite but cautious. I needed some air, I said. She smiled weakly. Mark's just trying to help. He says you've been under a lot of stress. My jaw clenched. He said that. She nodded, sitting down beside me. He worries about you. Losing your dad. I can't imagine. Her voice was kind, but I could hear the echo of Mark's words behind it. Planting seeds. Painting me as unstable, fragile. Did Mark tell you this place was his? I asked. She looked uncertain. He said it was the family's. That your dad wanted everyone to enjoy it. I stared out at the water. That's not what he said to me. She hesitated. Maybe you just remember it differently? The phrase made my stomach twist. Again, there it was, those same words, spreading like smoke. I stood up. Thanks for the lemonade. As I walked back toward the cabin, my mind was spinning. Every sentence he'd said, every casual shrug. It was all meant to make me question myself, to make him sound reasonable and me sound emotional. Inside, I found one of the kids, Emma, the youngest, drawing on the floor with crayons. She looked up and smiled. Uncle Mark says this is our new house. My heart sank. He said that. She nodded, holding up her picture. It was of the cabin with her family standing in front, smiling. I wasn't in it. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I packed up to leave again. Mark stood on the porch, watching me. Running off already? He called out. Just giving you space, I said quietly. He smiled. Good idea. You need time to think. I stared at him, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't kindness. It was control. He wanted to rewrite the story so completely that even I'd forget what was true. I got in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I didn't turn on the radio this time. The sound of gravel crunching under my tires was enough. Halfway down the road, I pulled over. My breath came in shallow bursts. I felt angry, but beneath the anger was something worse, a creeping doubt that scared me more than anything. What if I really was remembering wrong? The thought slipped in like a whisper and refused to leave. But then, as I sat there in the dim light, I remembered something else. Dad's handwriting on the inside of the kitchen cabinet door. He used to jot little notes there, like reminders to buy nails or fix the roof before winter. I'd seen it every summer of my life. I hadn't checked it. The next thought came fast and clear. What if there's something written there? The idea sparked through me like fire. I turned the car around. By the time I got back, the cabin was quiet. The porch light was off, and the night was thick with crickets. I parked a little down the road and walked the rest of the way. Through the window, I saw the glow of a TV and Mark asleep on the couch. I moved quietly, barefoot, heart racing. Inside the kitchen, moonlight spilled across the counter. I crouched, opened the cabinet, and there it was, faded but still there, Dad's handwriting. Azalea, this place is yours. Always take care of it. Tears blurred my vision. I took a photo with my phone, careful not to make a sound. Then I slipped back out into the night, the words echoing in my mind like a promise finally remembered. I wasn't crazy, and Mark, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. The night air felt heavier than before, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. My hands still trembled from what I'd seen inside that cabinet. My father's handwriting, faint but certain, a whisper from the past, cutting through the lies. I stood at the edge of the woods behind the cabin, breathing hard, trying to steady the rush in my chest. The moonlight caught the outline of the lake through the trees, silver and still. The world was silent except for the slow rhythm of water against the dock. That message wasn't a memory. It was proof. But proof meant nothing if it stayed hidden. I crouched low, pulling out my phone again to make sure the photo had saved. It had. The shaky image of the cabinet door glowed on the screen. Faint pencil marks, each letter etched with that uneven left-handed slant I'd know anywhere. Still, a photo could be dismissed, argued, twisted. Mark would find a way to call it coincidence or damage. I needed more. Something undeniable. The shed loomed behind the cabin, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the boxes I'd seen earlier were stacked haphazardly. I slipped inside, quietly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. The faint smell of oil and dust filled the air. One by one, I started opening the boxes, careful, deliberate. Fishing gear, old jackets, a coffee tin filled with nails, a stack of brittle letters tied with string. The letters stopped me. They weren't sealed, just bundled together like someone had intended to sort through them and never did. The top one was addressed to Hollow Ridge Property Office. My pulse quickened. I unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled in my hands. It was written in my father's handwriting, unmistakably his. The date was 3 months before he passed. To whom it may concern, I'd like to finalize the cabin ownership transfer to my daughter, Azalea. She's the one who understands this land. It belongs to her after I'm gone. My throat went dry. Underneath, his signature, full name, neat and exact. I felt the world tilt slightly. There it was. The truth, quiet, hidden, and waiting. A sound outside made me freeze, gravel crunching softly, too close. My fingers tightened around the letter. The flashlight beam flickered under the door. Mark. I quickly folded the paper, tucking it inside my jacket pocket, and slipped behind a row of paint cans. The door creaked open, slow and cautious. He stepped inside, his silhouette cutting across the dim light. He was holding his phone like a flashlight, its beam sliding over the walls. Azalea, he called softly. You out here? My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would give me away. He took another step in. You shouldn't be sneaking around at night. Dangerous in these woods. His voice had changed, lower, controlled, like a warning wrapped in concern. I stayed perfectly still. He scanned the shelves side, then muttered, probably left already. After a few moments, the door shut again. The crunch of gravel faded. I exhaled slowly, my breath shaky. I waited another full minute before slipping out through the back, avoiding the porch light. By the time I reached the car, the adrenaline was fading, replaced by something sharper: focus. I wasn't going to let him gaslight me again. I started the car, but didn't drive off. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the camera roll again. The photo of the cabinet, the picture of the letter. I zoomed in, studying every curve of ink, every date. It wasn't enough. I needed something official. I needed the original document, the Hollow Ridge property office. That was where this all connected. The next morning, the fog hung low over the hills as I drove into town. The small brick building sat between an old bakery and a thrift shop, its faded sign half covered by ivy. Inside, it smelled like dust and paper. A bell jingled as I stepped in, and a woman behind the counter looked up from her computer. Her name tag read Helen. "Morning," she said with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm hoping so," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "My name's Azalea Carter. My father, Robert Carter, owned property up on Hollow Ridge. I believe he filed a transfer of ownership before he passed." She typed something into her computer. "Do you know when the paperwork was submitted?" I nodded. "Around April, 3 months before he passed away." She scanned the monitor, scrolling slowly. I see the property file, but no record of transfer." I frowned. "Are you sure? There should be something." She clicked again, her brow furrowing. "Wait, there's a note here. Says the file was requested for review by a Mark Carver." My stomach dropped. "He's my cousin." Helen looked up, cautious now. "It says the documents were taken out for verification, but they were never returned." My pulse started pounding in my ears. "When was that?" I asked. "June 14th, she said, "a few weeks after your father's passing." I stared at the desk. June 14th. That was around the same time Mark told me he moved in. Helen gave me a sympathetic look. "Would you like me to print what's left in the file?" "Yes, please." She printed a few sheets, a copy of the deed, tax records, and one scanned note from my father's original file. His handwriting was faint but visible. "Transfer pending Azalea Carter. Final confirmation needed." That was enough. I thanked her and stepped outside, clutching the papers like lifelines. The sun was just breaking through the clouds now, painting the road in pale gold. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. For the first time in weeks, something inside me felt solid again, like the ground was returning beneath my feet. But then my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You shouldn't dig where shadows live." I froze. My throat went dry. The message vanished a second later, deleted before I could even take a screenshot. The sunlight suddenly felt colder. By the time I got back to the cabin road, the air had turned still. The forest seemed to hold its breath as I parked at a distance. I didn't go to the front door. Instead, I circled around to the side window, the one near my father's old workshop. Through the glass, I could see Mark sitting at the table, his laptop open, papers scattered around him. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I heard faint murmurs, his voice on a call. I leaned closer. "Yeah, she's been snooping again," he said quietly. "I'll handle it." "No, the papers are safe. She won't find the originals." He paused, listening. "Then, don't worry. Once the sale goes through, it won't matter who thinks they own it." "Sale?" My stomach twisted. He wasn't just stealing, he was selling. I stepped back quickly, heart hammering. My boot hit a branch, and it snapped underfoot. Mark's head turned. I ducked low, pressing myself against the wall. The door opened a moment later. "Azalea," he called, voice sharp this time. "That you?" I stayed silent. He stepped out, scanning the trees, then muttered something I couldn't catch. The sound of his footsteps faded as he walked around the cabin. I took my chance, slipping through the open door. His laptop was still on. I hesitated for half a heartbeat, then moved closer. Emails filled the screen. Messages to a real estate firm in Pine Hollow. Attached were scanned documents, forged transfer letters, property deeds with my father's signature copied and pasted. My hands shook as I scrolled. There it was, a draft contract for sale. Buyer name, Hollow Ridge Developments Ltd. He was selling the land. My father's land. I quickly snapped photos of every document, every email, my heart racing faster with each click. Then, just as I reached for the final one, a reflection flickered in the screen, movement behind me. Mark stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, cold. I froze. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping closer. "Why are you going through my things?" I swallowed hard. "You forged his signature." He smiled faintly. "I preserved the property." "Big difference." "You're lying." He took another step. "You've always been dramatic, Azalea. You think the world's against you. But this is business. You wouldn't understand." I backed toward the door. "It's theft." He reached out, suddenly gripping my wrist. "You don't know what you're doing." The flash of fear hit first, then anger. I pulled free and shoved him back. "Don't touch me." For a second, he looked startled, then smirked. "You're overreacting again." I didn't answer. I bolted out the door, running down the path to my car. Gravel sprayed under my feet. Behind me, I heard him call out, but I didn't stop. By the time I reached the car, my breath came in sharp bursts. I slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there, shaking. The photos were still on my phone, clear, undeniable proof. My hands trembled as I saved them to a hidden folder and backed them up to the cloud. The cabin lights flickered in my rearview mirror. Mark was standing on the porch, watching me. He didn't shout or chase this time. He just stood there, smiling faintly, like someone who thought he was still in control. I started the engine, my pulse steady now. He didn't know it yet, but I had everything I needed. And soon, the shadows he'd been hiding behind would turn against him. I didn't drive far that night, just enough to see the cabin fade in my rearview mirror, the lights dimming until they looked like fireflies swallowed by the trees. My hands still trembled on the wheel. I could feel the pulse in my throat, hard, steady, and real. I pulled into a small turnout near the lake, cut the engine, and sat in the quiet. The moon shimmered across the water like broken glass. For a while, I just listened to my heartbeat, to the faint hum of insects, to the sound of my own breathing settling into something slower. Then I opened my phone again. The photos of the forged papers glowed on the screen. I zoomed in, studying the copied signature, the timestamp on his emails, the details of the sale contract. Each piece fit like a puzzle my father had started and Mark had tried to erase. I didn't know much about property law, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just deceit. It was fraud. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. By morning, the fog had lifted, and so had my fear. I stopped at a diner on the edge of Hollow Ridge, a quiet place with checkered floors and the smell of bacon that never quite left the air. The waitress, an older woman with gray hair pulled into a neat bun, refilled my coffee 3 times before I realized I'd hardly touched it. "You okay, hon?" she asked kindly. I forced a small smile, just thinking things through. She nodded knowingly, the way people do when they sense trouble, but don't pry. "Thinking's good. Just don't overthink yourself into a hole." Her words lingered. I thanked her, paid my bill, and stepped outside. The morning sun was soft, glinting off car windshields and dew-wet grass. It felt like a clean slate. I drove straight to the local sheriff's office. The building was small, a faded brick structure, with a flag fluttering lazily out front. Inside, a young deputy greeted me. "Morning, ma'am. How can we help you?" I need to report property fraud, I said, my voice steady. And I have proof. He blinked, then gestured for me to follow him to a small office. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with kind eyes, listened as I laid everything out. The forged emails, the missing documents, the signature, the date. I showed him the photos. He took his time examining each one, occasionally glancing at me, then back at the screen. When I finished, he leaned back. You said this Mark Carver is family? Cousin, I said quietly. My father left the cabin to me. He twisted the story after Dad passed. The sheriff nodded slowly. Unfortunately, that happens more often than you'd think. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. These emails could be enough for a warrant, but we'll need originals. You mentioned he had physical papers. Yes, I said. In the cabin. His laptop, too. Everything's there. He gave a small nod. Then we'll do this right. I'll reach out to the county records office first, verify your father's file, and coordinate with a judge. But Azalea, I'm going to ask you to stay out of that property for now. Don't confront him again. I hesitated, but nodded. Understood. He gave me his card. If he contacts you, you call me right away. I tucked the card into my pocket, thanked him, and walked out feeling lighter. For once, I wasn't alone in this. Back at my motel, I spread everything out on the bed. The letters, the photos, the printed records Helen had given me. I organized them in order, labeled them with sticky notes, and made copies on the motel's tiny printer. By evening, I'd created a full file, neat, detailed, undeniable. It wasn't vengeance I felt anymore. It was clarity. But Mark wasn't the type to sit quietly while things slipped from his grip. That night, as I packed my bag, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was him. Mark, we need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then another came. Mark, meet me at the cabin. Tonight. It's important. My instinct screamed no. But another part of me, the part that had lived in fear for too long, wanted to end it once and for all. I texted back one word. Fine. The sky was dark when I pulled up to the cabin. The porch light was on, casting a dim yellow halo across the front steps. I kept my phone, recording as I walked up, tucked in my jacket pocket. Mark opened the door before I could knock. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost rehearsed. Glad you came, he said. I didn't answer. He gestured toward the living room. The air inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. The laptop was gone from the table. Look, Azalea, he began, his tone soft. This has gotten out of hand. You've misunderstood some things, and I don't want family fighting over paperwork. Paperwork you forged, I said, quietly. He gave a small laugh. You've been talking to people. I see. That's dangerous. You know, accusing someone of a crime without proof. Oh, I have proof, I said. He stopped smiling. Do you? The silence between us thickened. I could hear the faint crackle of the fireplace, the wind brushing against the windows. You deleted files from the property office. I continued. You took the originals. The sheriff knows. He's getting a warrant. Mark's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Try me, I said, pulling out the sheriff's card and laying it on the table. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Fear, then calculation. He leaned back, forcing a chuckle. You always were dramatic, Azalea. You think anyone's going to believe your little story? You were barely around when your father got sick. I was here. I handled things. Handled them, or took them? His voice dropped. You don't know what your father wanted. I do, I said, steady now. He wrote it himself, and I found it. That made him freeze. I took out my phone, swiped to the photo of my father's handwritten letter, and set it face up on the table. His eyes darted over it. Then, to me, he didn't speak. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. "You can keep pretending," I said, "but it's over, Mark. You don't get to rewrite what's true." His hand tightened around the edge of the table. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You did." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard him mutter, "You'll regret this." But his voice cracked just enough to betray the tremor underneath. The next morning, the sheriff called. They'd found the forged papers at the county clerk's office, returned anonymously overnight. A clerk had recognized the signature discrepancies after receiving my documentation. Mark hadn't been arrested yet, but the investigation had begun. I sat by the motel window, sunlight spilling across the table, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not victory. Not joy. Just peace. For the first time, I could breathe without second-guessing myself. Still, I knew Mark wouldn't let it go that easily. People like him rarely did. That evening, I drove back to the lake parked by the dock and sat for a while. The air smelled of pine and rain. I watched the reflection of the cabin lights in the distance, steady, silent, almost serene. My phone buzzed once more. "Unknown number. You think you've won." But family secrets don't stay buried forever. I stared at the message, then at the dark woods beyond the water. Instead of fear, a calm washed over me, because this time I wasn't running or hiding. I had the truth. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, always comes back to the surface. I saved the message, took a screenshot, and sent it straight to the sheriff with a short note, "Just keeping you updated." Then I turned off my phone, leaned back, and watched the moon rise over Hollow Ridge. The water shimmered softly, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere deep inside, I felt my father's presence, quiet, steady, like the land itself had been waiting for this moment. For once, the cabin wasn't a place of fear or confusion. It was home again, and I'd finally taken it back. The morning air felt different that day, crisp and light, yet heavy with a sense of finality. I parked my car at the edge of the cabin drive and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the familiar structure bathed in the pale golden light of dawn. Hollow Ridge had never looked so calm, so quiet, and yet every shadow seemed to whisper the tension of the nights before. I stepped out, boots crunching softly on the gravel, and took a deep breath. There was still work to be done. The evidence I had collected was safe, backed up, and delivered to the sheriff, but reclaiming my father's legacy wasn't just about law. It was about presence, about walking into the cabin and feeling that it belonged to me in every sense. The porch felt solid under my hands as I opened the door. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Everything was still as Mark had left it, a reminder of the chaos he tried to leave behind. I let the door swing fully open and stepped inside, breathing in the scent of old wood and the faint aroma of coffee that lingered like a ghost. I began methodically, moving through each room as if marking territory, not in anger but in quiet, deliberate reclaiming. I picked up the coffee mugs, wiped down counters, set the chairs straight. Small actions, but with each one, I felt the weight of ownership settling over me like a cloak. This cabin was mine. It had always been meant for me. In the living room, I paused in front of the mantel. My father's old photographs were still there, some tilted, some smudged with dust. I ran my fingers over the frames, feeling the faint warmth of memory. One of the pictures was of him holding me when I was barely 4, smiling, sunburned from our last trip up the mountain. I smiled faintly, a mixture of grief and resolve settling deep in my chest. I found an old journal tucked into the shelf behind the books. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, but the handwriting inside was unmistakable. My father's thoughts, his fears, his hopes for me spilled onto the pages. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through them carefully. Every word reinforced the reality of what had been stolen from me, and what I was now taking back. Hours passed unnoticed as I organized, cleaned, and cataloged. I even found small trinkets from my childhood, a half-broken toy truck, a ribbon from my first recital. Each item was a reminder of moments that Mark had tried to erase from this place. I held them, feeling a strange mixture of anger and nostalgia, then carefully set them on the window sill where the sunlight could touch them. By late afternoon, the cabin had begun to feel alive again. The air smelled less of dust and more of home. I went outside to the porch and looked around the yard. The grass was overgrown in places, and the flower beds near the cabin were choked with weeds. I rolled up my sleeves and grabbed a pair of gardening gloves from the shed, determined to restore it. While working, I noticed a small bird trapped near the fence. It fluttered helplessly, wings brushing against the wire. I gently lifted it and released it, watching it soar into the sky. That simple act felt symbolic, freeing what was trapped, reclaiming control over life in a way I hadn't realized I needed. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, I paused to watch the shadows stretch across the cabin walls. My phone buzzed, a text from the sheriff confirming the investigation was moving forward. Mark's misdeeds were being officially documented, and it was only a matter of time before legal ownership was firmly in my hands. The realization gave me a quiet strength I hadn't felt in weeks. That night, I lit the fireplace and sat in the living room, letting the warmth settle into my bones. I didn't touch my phone. I didn't plan for the future just yet. I simply sat and listened to the wind outside, the crackle of the fire, and the subtle sounds of the cabin itself. The house was breathing with me now, not against me. The next morning, I woke early, sunlight spilling across the cabin floor. I decided to tackle the workshop, a place where my father had spent countless hours repairing tools, tinkering with projects, and leaving traces of himself. The workbench was cluttered, but I started sorting through it, setting aside tools that were rusting, cleaning surfaces, and discovering old notes he had left for himself. Among the notes was a list of supplies for a cabin renovation project he had dreamed of but never completed. Paint, nails, wood planks, small things that seemed mundane but carried the weight of intention. I decided I would finish what he started, each task a way of honoring him while solidifying my claim to the place. While organizing, I found an old envelope with my name on it. It contained a letter my father had written years ago, folded carefully, addressed in his familiar handwriting. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. "Dear Azalea, this cabin belongs to you one day. If anything ever happens to me, remember that it is your sanctuary. Protect it, love it, and make it your own. You are capable of more than you know." Tears welled in my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling an intimate connection across time. That moment anchored me. I wasn't just reclaiming a building. I was reclaiming a piece of my past, my father's trust, and my own sense of self. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly. I repaired broken floorboards, painted walls a soft cream, and restored shelves that had fallen into disrepair. I planted flowers in the neglected beds, swept the porches, and hung curtains my mother had once sewn. With each act, the cabin began to breathe with new life, reflecting not only the past but also my presence, my ownership, my claim. Neighbors who had watched Mark's comings and goings cautiously observed me from a distance. Some nodded, offering quiet smiles or words of encouragement. A few had seen the tension, the disputes, the arguments, and they were relieved to witness a sense of resolution. It was strange how external validation, however small, helped cement the reality that I belonged here. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the ridges, I found myself at the dock. The lake was calm, reflecting fiery streaks of sunset. I sat on the edge, letting my feet dangle just above the water. In that moment, I realized how much had been taken from me. The peace of this place, the inheritance of my father's love, the feeling of home, and how much I had reclaimed through courage and persistence. But reclaiming what was lost wasn't just about the cabin. It was about the right to trust myself, to stand firm against manipulation, and to honor my father's memory without fear or hesitation. The next morning, I visited the local records office again, armed with the copies I had collected. The clerk smiled warmly as I presented the evidence and documents. "Looks like everything's finally in order," she said. "Your father's intentions are clear. Congratulations, Azalea." I nodded, a deep sense of relief settling over me. The property was legally mine. The battle that had haunted me for months was over, not through confrontation alone, but through proof, persistence, and resilience. Returning to the cabin, I felt a serenity I hadn't known since I was a child. The familiar smell of pine, the soft creak of the floors, the distant call of birds. Everything felt reclaimed, not by force, but by care. I stood on the porch that evening, the horizon painted in purples and golds, and whispered a quiet promise to my father. "I won't let it go. I'll protect it, just like you wanted." For the first time, I slept in that cabin without fear, without tension, and without doubt. The cabin had returned to me in every sense, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And in reclaiming it, I reclaimed a part of myself that had been buried under betrayal, lies, and shadows. The land, the memories, and the quiet moments of reflection had restored me in ways I hadn't imagined possible. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I stood on the porch of my reclaimed cabin, feeling the wind brush against my face. The battles, the lies, the sleepless nights, they were all behind me now. What remained was more than property. It was my peace, my connection to my father, and the certainty that I could trust myself again. I had taken back not just what was lost, but a part of my soul stronger and wiser than before. The cabin was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly home.